Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prasannatma, Balaram Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam Prabhuji. Prabhuji, you have to unmute yourself, Prabhuji. We can't hear you, Prabhu.
Yes, Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Dandavat Pranam to you. Thank you so much.
Dandavat Pranam, Prabhuji. Dandavat Pranam. Prabhuji, okay. Are we ready, Prabhuji?
Yes, Prabhu, I'm ready.
Okay, Hare Krishna, devotees, Dandavat Pranam. Welcome to Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Today we are very fortunate to have the association of His Grace Prasannatma Balaram Prabhu, who will be sharing the nectar and enlightening us from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, chapter number 28 and sloka number 32. Over to you, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, you want me to share the sloka or you will share by yourself, Prabhu?
If you can share, it will be nice.
Sure.
I'm having some problem with this thing. I got disconnected.
No problem, Prabhu.
I hope my audio is okay.
Yes, Prabhuji, it is clear, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Yes, Prabhuji, we can.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. So, Hare Krishna to all the devotees, Dandavat Pranams. So, we will be today looking at the fourth canto, 28th chapter, verse number 32. So, the chapter is where Puranjana is becoming a woman in his next life. So, that's the chapter that we are looking at. So, Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jaya Mudirayet Nashta Prayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yat Kripatam Aham Vande Sri Guru Dinatarinam Paramanandha Madhavam Sri Chaitanya Ishwaram. Hare Krishna. Yeah. So the verse is like this. Agastya Pragvitaram Upaye me Drita Vratham Yasyam Dridachyuto Jata Idma Vahatmajo Munihi. So if anybody wants to repeat, they can do that.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Agastya Prakaduhitaram Upaye Madruta Pratham Yashyam Drudachyuto Jata Idama Ava Hatmajo Munihi. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji. So, in this, we will just go for the word-to-word meaning now. Agastya, the great sage Agastya. Rak, first. Duhitaram, daughter. Upaye me, married. I'm not able to see it once again. Drita Vratham. Dhrita Vratam. So that means taken to vows. Yes, Yam, through whom Dridachutaha, named Dridachuta, Jataha was born, Idmavaha, named Idmavaha, Atmaja, son, Munihi, the great sage. The translation: the great sage named Agastya married the firstborn daughter of Malayadvaja, the avowed devotee of Lord Krishna. From her, one son was born, whose name was Dridachyuta, and from him, another son was born, whose name was Idmavaha. The purport by Srila Prabhupada, Jai Srila Prabhupada. The name Agastya Muni is very significant. Agastya Muni represents the mind. The word Agastya indicates that the senses do not act independently. And the word Muni means mind. The mind is the center of all the senses. And thus, the senses cannot work independent of the mind. When the mind takes to the cult of bhakti, it engages in devotional service. The cult of bhakti or Bhakti Latha is the first daughter of Malayadvaja. And as previously described, her eyes are always upon Krishna. Asithe Kshanam. One cannot render bhakti to any demigod. Bhakti can be rendered only to Vishnu. Shravanam Kirthanam Vishnuhu. Thinking the absolute truth to be without form, the Mayavadis say that the word bhakti can apply to any form of worship. In this verse, if this were the case, a devotee could imagine any demigod or any godly form and worship it. This, however, is not the real thing. The real fact is that bhakti can be applied only to Lord Vishnu and his expansions. Therefore, Bhakti Latha is Dhrida Vritha, the great vow. For when the mind is completely engaged in devotional service, the mind does not fall down. If one tries to advance by other means, by Karma Yoga or Jnana Yoga, one will fall down. But if one is fixed in Bhakti, he never falls down. Thus, from Bhakti Latha, the son, Dridachyuta, is born. And from Dridachyuta, the next son, Idmavaha, is born. The word Idmavaha refers to one who carries wood for burning in a sacrifice when approaching a spiritual master. The point is that Bhakti Latha, the cult of devotion, fixes one in his spiritual position. One so fixed never comes down, and he begets children who are strict followers of the Shastric injunctions as said in the Vedas. Tadvignartham sagurumeva bigachet samitpanihi strotriyam dhammanishtam. In the line of devotional service, those who are initiated are strict followers of the Vedic scriptural injunctions. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
I think your voice is breaking up a little bit, Prabhuji. Little bit in between. Ah, yes, Prabhuji.
Is this okay now? Or it's the same?
Yeah, I think almost the same problem. You can go ahead, Prabhu. I don't know whether it's only for me or others also have same problem. Little bit breaking.
Okay, I think just a second, Prabhu. I'll see if I can do anything about it.
Why is this clear, Prabhu?
Oh, it's clear, is it?
It's clear, Prabhu?
It's clear.
Okay.
Okay, Prabhuji, you can carry on, Prabhu.
Thank you, mercy of the devotees. All right, so yeah. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nitinamine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschayata Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivas Adi Gaurabhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, so thank you. So before we continue with the purport, I seeking the blessings of all the Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis who are present here, so that I'll be able to do some justice to this verse. So though I'm not qualified to talk on the mind and then higher things, and seeking your blessings so that I have the right words come out at the right time, the right spirit. And this is more a seva or a service for the Guru Parampara and for the pleasure of the Lordships, and also for my own purification. So there are too many hands here. Please bear with me. Okay. So this particular verse, it goes like this. Agastya prag duhitaram upaye me dritavratham yasyam dhridachyuto jata idma vahatmajo munihi. The great sage named Agastya married the firstborn daughter of Malayadvaja, avowed devotee of Lord Krishna. From her, one son was born whose name was Dhridachyuta, and from him another son was born whose name is Idmavaha. So here actually we are seeing how Narada Muni is continuing to speak to the king Prachina Bharishat, and he's continuing with this allegory with respect to Puranjana. So we saw in the earlier verses how Puranjana got a woman's body because he was always thinking of his wife, and that is how then he gets the body of a woman. Now, in this, actually, can you, if you just take a moment and then can we picture this particular thing of Narada Muni having a conversation with King Prachina Bharishat, and then he's telling the powerful king that he'll become a woman in his next life. I mean, that's like, it'll definitely offend or it'll definitely anger Prachina Bharishat, because Prachina Bharishat is a king, a great king, a Kshatriya. So we all know the Kshatriya spirit. So pride is touched very quickly. And then the chivalry is kind of punctured if that type of a conversation happens. So Narada Muni, in one sense, was actually putting himself to risk if he had done that. So the king can jail him or even he can get him killed and so on and so forth, So, but then Narada Muni, do you think he was afraid of these things? No, I don't think he was afraid of all this. He need not actually fear the king like you and I. But still, he is very cautious. He's using this allegory. Why? Because there is a kind of a lesson for all of us in this. The lesson is when we are speaking, then we'll have to be careful not to agitate the mind of others or the listeners. So in fact, Lord Krishna, he's saying in Bhagavad Gita, Na buddhi vedam janayet. That means not to disrupt the minds of the ignorant people in general, and that's by way of our speech or by way of our behavior. So we will have to be cognizant of this particular fact and then ensure that whatever message that we have to communicate, however right it might be, but still we'll have to be quite mindful of what we are speaking or how we are addressing a particular issue, because it has to be agreeable to that other person in one sense or the other, or rather in all sense. So in conclusion, we can say, if there is one wrong statement or even one wrong word which is uttered, then the conversation stops altogether. Stops as in not physically. We might continue with our conversation. We can continue the talking. But then what happens? The ears of the listeners actually close. So subsequent things are not registering. They hear one word or a sentence which is disturbing, then subsequent things are not being registered. So it is just like a blank wall. You're talking to a blank wall. Because the listener most often is thinking about that comment or that word. And this is not very hard for us to relate. We all have gone through this. So when we are disturbed or agitated by a certain sentence or a word, then that lingers in our mind. And then what happens is we stop listening to other things, or otherwise we would conclude prematurely and then mentally give up the interest or something like that. So we might be nodding the head or trying to maintain that smile and all that, but then it will just switch off. You know, we might say, "Oh, he's just saying this simply." So as listeners, we have all experienced this, and then we stop listening. So how can they speak like that? That's how our mind will be running wild. You know, our mind dwells on that only, and so there is no effect. So in one sense, it's okay to say that King Puranjana is becoming a woman because that's a fictitious character that is there. So as he was only thinking of women, or rather as he was only thinking of his wife, then he becomes a woman in the next life. But then actually the reference is being made to King Prachinha Barishat. And then by this way of using this allegory, Narad Muni is bringing out a wonderful technique of communicating with others, especially when it's a sensitive topic, though it might be the truth. So that's a lesson for all of us. And then the next part is that as speakers, then we need to be mindful so that the listener's mind is not agitated. Now, talking of mind, this verse is actually describing how the mind has to be married to our intelligence, which is imbibed in the cult of bhakti or devotional service. I know it's a very long statement, so I'll try to read it again. The verse is actually describing how the mind has to be married to our intelligence. That intelligence which is imbibed in the cult of bhakti or devotional service. Then that is the right situation. So thereby what happens? There is no fall down. So in the verse, we can see this is being explained by way of marriage. Here it is said that there is marriage between who? Between Agastya Muni and the first daughter of Malayadvaja, who is actually Asite Kshanam. That means whose eyes are black or whose eyes are always fixed on Krishna. And that's how Srila Prabhupada is explaining in the purport. So now there is marriage. So we have a bride and a bridegroom, which is Agastya Muni and Malayadvaja's first daughter. So let us see their qualities. And then let us also see what type of children they will have or they had, what offsprings they had, and try to relate to what Narada Muni is trying to say. So the bridegroom is Agastya Muni, and Agastya Muni is actually referring to mind. So what is the nature of mind? What is mind? So let's try to see the quality of the mind. The mind we know is Chanchala. I mean, all of us have heard this particular verse where Arjuna himself is saying, Chanchala hi mana Krishna. In Bhagavad Gita, he's saying that. So now who's Arjuna? Arjuna is not an ordinary man. I mean, he has made many penances. He has pleased Lord Shiva. And then thereby he has learned all martial weaponry. And then he's also known for a very steady mind. He's a Drida or he's a Dhira, because he was able to, in the Swayamvar of Draupadi, then he was able to shoot the arrow into the eye of a moving or a revolving fish, looking at the reflection in the water. And there we've seen how his concentration was 100%, whereas nobody else could do that. So he is somebody who's a Dhira, who's a very strong personality. But what is he saying? He says, I cannot control the mind as it is Chanchala. It is always moving. And how does the mind move? If we spend a little time, we can agree on this. See, the mind does not stay in one place. We all know that. And then it has another unique quality. No, it does not stay where we want it to stay. Okay. But it will go and then stay where we don't want it to stay. So this is a very funny quality that the mind has, very dangerous quality in one sense, because it will, I mean, we can think of this. If we are saying, like, for example, if you tell a person, like, you don't think about a parrot at any cost, as an example, I'm saying, then he will only think of that parrot, nothing else for the next, at least for the few minutes, or if not for a couple of hours. He'll say, why why did he tell me not to think of the parrot? And then we'll think of the parrot. So this why and etc. and all that. So in one way, this kind of helps us to understand how our mind is. I mean, we all know this, but then it doesn't come to our mind so easily. That's another trick of mind, probably. So I remember, in fact, there is another thing, as kids, I remember during this Ganesh Chaturthi festival, there's this particular day when you're not supposed to see the moon. So the elders used to always tell us that you should not see the moon. And now we as children never really took it to our head much. So we're playing and all that. Then suddenly, in the midst of the play, during that evening on that particular day, somebody will come and remind us, no, I hope you all have not seen the moon. Don't see the moon today. And immediately, instinctively, now it's in our mind, and then you try to look up, or you try not to look up, but then the moon is so much in your mind that eventually you end up looking at it. So this is how the mind actually tricks us. So this, in fact, in one of the lectures, a particular Acharya was saying that he was trying to give a comparison to drive home the point of the mind. He was saying, mind is like a monkey. We all know that. Now he says, okay, you have monkey and then you have mind. So which is more easily controllable? So the obvious answer is it is easier to control the monkey than the mind. So that's the nature of mind. Now he's went on further and then he says, now let's presume that this monkey is drunk, like you give it some liquor and then it is in a very agitated mind state. Now you have that monkey which is drunk, and then you have the mind which is easier to control. Then again the answer is still the mind. And then finally he goes one more step and then he says, now just imagine that this drunk monkey is stung by a scorpion. Now if there's one bite of a scorpion, you know how people will jump, and that too a monkey. So as it is jumping. So and then it is drunk on top of it. So now which is easier to control? It is obviously again the mind, and that's the nature of mind. So by these examples, I think we can kind of relate how difficult it is for us to kind of control the mind. Let's acknowledge that fact. And then, if you're looking at it a little more technically for people who are interested, it says like the current day scientists who deal with science, they say that they describe the mind as saying that it is a pattern making system. Let me just explain that a little bit as an academic interest. So now this will help us to understand what is mind. To some extent, we may not understand it completely. So he's saying like you have a flat surface and then there are some patterns on it, like some ups and downs. There are some ridges and curves and all that. You can take a sheet or a plain surface, and then there are these edges, these kind of undulations that are there. Now, if we are pouring, and these are all the impressions, you can call that as the impressions. So the mind is very similar to that. It's trying to compare the two. And now, let's say we pour a little water on that, and then it will take a certain path. It will go like, say, left, right, and then, it will go down, and then it will reach one particular point, and it will stay there. So that's the nature of water, right? It will always flow through the path of least resistance. So that's what they say in science. Okay, so now it will go and then take that path. Now, what happens if you pour a little more water after that? So it will take the same path. It will not take any other path. So there is a kind of an impression that gets created, and then the water keeps on flowing only in the designated path. Of course, assuming that the volume is not much and all that. This is just for understanding sake. So this kind of impression that is there, actually what happens, the earlier water which had traveled that path has created an impression or a little more deeper impression, which makes the subsequent water to flow through that same path. So the mind is also like that. It's a system where there's a pattern that is already set. And this is called as a conditioning. We can equate that to conditioning that we all have heard. So we are conditioned to think in a certain way. Our mind works, or it is conditioned to work in a certain way. And we know there are these three gunas by which a broad guideline is given of how the mind works and all that, how we conclude, how we look at things, the perspectives and all that. So the sattva gun, the rajo gun and the tamo gun, and the various permutations and combinations of that. So each one is giving us millions of such patterns which are there. And then each time there is any impression that is happening, water is poured, which is actually an impression through the senses. Because we know the senses, we perceive the world through the senses, and then sitting place of the senses is the mind. So the mind and the senses are connected. We know that. So now, whenever the senses are perceiving something, then there's an impression that is created in the mind. And then each time that is there, then it becomes deeper and deeper. So it is very difficult to, and then we form an opinion. So now it is very difficult to have another impression when the same kind of object or the same senses are coming into, or the same thing is perceived by the senses. Like say, we see a person whom we don't like, and then there is some emotion that is connected to it, as an example. So next time we see that person, we get the same emotion. So it is the same imprint, the same path the water is taking. Like that in the mind, it is the same flow of thought that happens. And this is conditioning. So now why this is important is because once we are able to objectify our mind and then we are able to kind of visualize how this mind is structured, then we can kind of aspire or hope to change the pattern or change the flow of water, change the direction of the flow of water. We can at least try that out, right? So and that's how we at least now get an idea, or we can picturize why I am behaving in a certain way and why certain thoughts keep coming to me when I see certain things, and so on and so forth. Now, another quality of the mind is that it is always looking to be happy. What can I get out of something or some situation? That's the mood of the mind. It always is in the future. That's the nature of mind. It is not contented by saying, now I am happy. Say, if I do this, then I'll become happy later on. So this is another quality of the mind. It is always thinking of the future, and then it is devising ways and means of how to be happy in the future. It is not contented if we are happy now. Maybe for a few minutes we might be happy, but then again, the mind is chanchala. It moves on. It doesn't stay there. It moves on. Okay, I got what I wanted. Oh yeah, I'm happy. Yes. And then maybe for a few minutes, or few days, or few months maximum. But then after that, then again, it gets into that galloping mood. So we try to catch up with it every time. So we are actually following the mind wherever it is going. And that's a very dangerous situation. And so now this concept of trying to be happy, the same situation makes, another aspect is that it's not that the same situation which will make everybody happy. What will give a certain situation will make me happy, it might make the other person unhappy. So these variations are always there based on the pattern of the mind of each one of us. So like, for example, rain. Rain, of course, we know this example. An umbrella seller becomes very happy if it rains, because he knows that means there is more business, which means more money, and more money means more happiness for me. So I have more money to spend and all that. Whereas an ordinary person is very, very dejected because, oh my God, I get wet, I have to, it's a discomfort. So if there is discomfort, then there is no happiness. So ultimately it is one's happiness that is prime. But then how the mind has worked to get to that happiness depends on whether we are, whether we are in the mood where it is making us happy or where it is going to make us sad. And it could vary from person to person, even though the object that we see is the same, which is the rain in this example. Likewise with a sweet or anything, any object that you see, any object that we perceive with our senses, it is the same. So now, when we are willing to be engaged, then only the emotion begins. That is what we say, happiness or sadness. So in fact, even in Bhagavad Gita, there is a shloka that relates to this, which is Bhogeshwarya Prasannatma Chetasam. So it says that there is, by contemplating, by looking at the objects, then we are actually, we seek pleasure out of it, and then we get bewildered by that. And this bewilderment, Tayapaharta Chetasam, bewilderment is happening in the mind. And when we are bewildered, then what happens? Then we know that the Vyavasayatmika Buddhi does not happen. Na vidiyate, it does not happen. So this is an understanding from Bhagavad Gita, where Srila Prabhupada is explaining in those purports very nicely of how we get bewildered, and then that will ensure that we are not taking to this Vyavasayatmika Buddhi. And what is Vyavasayatmika Buddhi? We'll try to discuss that a little more as we move on. Now, there is another aspect of mind that His Holiness Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Maharaj is saying. In fact, he actually has composed a poem which is called as Vaishnava Ke. Devotees are definitely aware of this. So where actually this Vaishnava Ke is a conversation. It's a set of around 19 stanzas, a poem which has got 19 stanzas. And then in that, Maharaj is actually talking, or he's saying how a devotee is talking or preaching to his or her mind. So it's a very wonderful redemption. And then there is also an explanation that is given where it is actually covering the ways by which a mind can fall down from pure devotional service. So he is calling, or he is addressing his mind as wretched. It starts off by saying, Dushtamana. It says, Dushtamana tumi kishera Vaishnava. So what type of a Vaishnava are you? Oh, Dushtamana, that is a wretched mind. So in this way, it's a soliloquy. It means like you're talking to your own self, or you're actually addressing the mind. And as an example, the very first stanza, it says that you are taking pleasure in nirjana bhakti. That is, you're doing devotional service, but then you want nirjana bhakti, which is actually not correct. And then you are taken that because you want pratishtha, because you want fame, or you want recognition. And because that is not being offered, then you shut off, and then you try to do nirjana bhakti. That most of the time our minds, such thoughts come in, right? I mean, if we are not getting the kind of importance that we feel we are entitled for, which is all a trick of the mind, and then we immediately try to act in a way, I mean, we try to disassociate with that particular association. So here, in conclusion in this verse, very nicely, it is said that if such a thought is coming, then please understand that your mind is not, it is working against you. So never give up association. That's the conclusion. Come what may, even if you are not given importance, even if you are put down, even if you are ridiculed, whatever it is, but then never give up devotee association. So that's the way in which this important point is brought out. So it's all to do with the mind. And then all the 19 stanzas, so wonderfully it is described there. So that's a discussion for another day in one sense. So I just wanted to give a flavor of what Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Maharaj has said. And by this we can understand that it is, I mean, of course, we all know, Prabhupada said we are all Goshti Anandis. So we take pleasure in associating with devotees. And we are not Brajanandi, and that is by choice. Even if our mind says become Brajanandi, then we should not, because a neophyte devotee is not qualified to be a Brajanandi, because then the mind will take control of that person. So it happened even for Bharat Maharaj when he fell down because he was alone. He allowed the thought of deer to wander into his mind, and then it kind of displaced all the thoughts of bhakti that was there in him, or whatever meditation he was doing and all that. But that happened, and there was no one to stop him. And that's the importance of association. So this is an aspect that we all are aware, but then we forget because our mind makes us forget it. So it's nice to be reminded of it more often than not. And then we know that in conclusion, it says that mind can be a friend or an enemy. Enemy, it becomes a friend when the mind is engaged in the goal of pure devotional service, and otherwise it becomes an enemy, because that we know. I mean, we understand those basic things. So in one sense, the conclusion is that man actually must deliver himself with his mind. So we know that. And then even in the 19 verses, it tells the same thing of what is to be done and how not to fall down. And the warning signals that are there in the mind is being discussed there. So there's a lot of importance for the mind. And in this verse also, the same thing is being discussed, but in a very allegorical way. So in the verse, it says that the senses are not independent, but attached to the mind. And that is why it is called as Agastya Muni. It's the sitting place of the senses, the mind we know. So we are talking about the mind, which is connected to the senses. And so the mind and the senses are taken together. And in one sense, because senses don't exist independently, they are attached to the mind. And that is described as Agastya Muni in this verse. So now we see how it is so difficult for us to refrain from things which are detrimental to our devotional service. So that is the nature of the mind. We have seen that. And this situation can be improved, or it can even be reversed completely, like by marrying the mind of to the cult of bhakti. That's what Prabhupada says in the purport. Like if you get them married, then they'll be okay. Like in the olden days also we would have, or even now, sometimes we say that, if a boy is very wayward and then he's not controllable, he doesn't listen to anyone, then there is always one saving grace. The elders will say, don't worry, a few years you get him married, he'll become all right. He'll come to, he's more controllable then. So likewise, here also, this mind, which is Agastya Muni, being married to the cult of bhakti, so that it comes to track. To bring the mind to track, it has to be married to bhakti cult or bhakti lata. That's the word Prabhupada uses here. So in the allegory, the daughter of Malaya Dhwaja, who's described as a person having eyes which are black, and so Prabhupada says it is always on Krishna, and then he refers to her as bhakti lata, and this is the Vyavasayatmika buddhi that we are talking about. It is the wisdom that is there to do devotional service, which is the bhakti lata that we are talking about, which is bhakti yoga, and then practicing bhakti. This is only with respect to Krishna and no one else, or Krishna and the Vishnu Tattvas and no one else, no other demigods. That is what we are seeing in the purport. So Srila Prabhupada is actually highlighting this particular fact that bhakti means to Vishnu only. So Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu. So we know the 9 stages of bhakti, all of it, whether there is Shravanam, we listen about Vishnu Tattvas, then it is Shravanam. Or when we are glorifying the Vishnu Tattvas, then only it is Kirtanam. That is why Kirtanam Vishnu. And then Smaranam again, when we are thinking of the pastimes of the Lord of Vishnu, then only it is called Smaranam. So likewise, all the Navavidha Bhakti, one after another, is all connected to Vishnu. So Bhakti, in one sense, is then, it means only devotional service to Vishnu and nothing else. So we don't have to say Vishnu Bhakti or anything, because Bhakti by itself means it is for Vishnu only. And the mind married to the intelligence of Bhakti Yoga is giving a benefit which is not there when the marriage happens to any other type of yoga. That's what Prabhupada says, like Karma Yoga or Jnana Yoga. So then it will be a failed marriage, or there will be a chance to fall down. So that is why the marriage of Bhakti Yoga is important. It's actually another way of saying that Bhakti Yoga, if we are attached to Bhakti Yoga, then we progress, we don't fall down. So the mind becomes a friend, and then that intelligence protects the mind in a way that it does not go here and there and do things which it is not supposed to do, and all of that. It doesn't dwell on all that. So even if you look at the second chapter, so much of detail is being said in terms of how the mind can trick us, and then it can make us do things that we are not supposed to do. So now, what is the result of such a marriage? There is this offspring of who's called as Dhrida Achyuta. Dhrida Achyuta. Achyuta means one who does not fall down. And Dhrida is very firmly situated. So the son is named Dhrida Achyuta, which means actually allegorically that you would be situated firmly, but then you will not fall down. It is as simple as that. And that's what it means. It means that there will be no fall down. So, which means that the soul will progress towards the Swarupa Siddhi, or towards our destination. It advances. It does not become a woman in the next birth and all that, like how it happened with King Puranjana. And then in turn, Dhrida Achyuta gets the son who is Idmavaha. That means one who acts as per the Vedic injunction. So definitely a person who's a Dhrida Achyuta will have as a follow through, he or she will end up doing Vedic injunctions. Doing things as per the Vedic injunctions. So he'll follow the scriptures, and then he will do what is being told. So that's the tenet of sadhana bhakti, we can say. So definitely he will follow the rules and regulations, starting from chanting the rounds, or doing 4 regulative principles, and then the tenets of Pancharatrika Vidhi as well as the Bhagavata Vidhi. So both of them will be followed. And that's the son of Achyuta, which is called as who's called as Idmavaha. So only devotee children will be born. And then, of course, Prabhupada goes on to say that only devotee children are born, or such souls are only attracted to a person who's a Dhrida Achyuta, or who is got, who is a byproduct of the marriage between his mind with the senses, that is his mind, and his intelligence in Bhakti, or Bhakti Lata, or the wisdom of remaining in Bhakti Yoga. So this way, though it's the same thing, but then we can see how Narada Muni so eloquently he is trying to, and interestingly, he is trying to explain the benefit of Bhakti Yoga to King Prachina Bharishat to keep his interest alive. He's talking of marriage, children, because he knows such topics will keep his interest alive. Now, for example, like if you say like he doesn't talk about marriage, children, but then he's just generally speaking about Bhakti Yoga, it may not have had the same effect for Prachina Bharishat, because he was a karmi, he was tuned to that. He was like, he was of the opinion that the senses are for enjoyment, and then my whole life is for that. And then, he was that type of a mood he was in, and then he was, so much of attachment was there. And now, how do you tell a person like that, and that to a powerful person, that, hey, look, you are too attached to your wife, you shouldn't be. And he'll say, go take a walk, but he's a king, so he may not stop at that. He might even imprison him or whatever. So that's why Narada Muni actually is taking this route of so eloquently, interestingly explaining that the benefit of Bhakti Yoga, following Bhakti Yoga. And following of Bhakti Yoga means filling our intelligence with the tenets of Bhakti, and making that the intelligence to actually govern the mind. Many of us know that sometimes, like there is knowledge, they know everything, but then the mind is separate. So intelligence is on one side, it is there, all the awareness is there, but then it is not married to the mind. That means it is not internalized. There is no realization, or there is no attempt for realization. So thereby they too remain as independent, not looking at each other. So words will remain just as words. Actions will be independent of the word or the thought. So it's not a good combination. It's like husband and wife, but not in talking terms. So naturally, when so much they are adrift, then there is no byproduct. So definitely the byproduct of Dhrida Vrita is, or not, Dhrida Achyuta is not at all there. So that means that the mind will continue to fall down, it will wander everywhere, whereas the knowledge is sitting there, and then you come to wrong conclusions. It might have a negative impact on this intelligence, because the mind will trick into believing that what you know or you have read is all wrong, and then try to have a compromise there. So which is not a very good situation. So and then of course in conclusion, Srila Prabhupada in his purport is saying Vijnatam Sagurume va Vigachet, and then he says Amit Ani Strotriyam Dhammanishtam. So the conclusion is that in the line of devotional service, those who are initiated are strict followers of Vedic scriptural injunctions. So when such a marriage happens, and then when they are together, and then you have this byproduct, which is Achyuta or Dhrida Achyuta, firmly situated and not fall down, then natural course would be to follow the Vedic scriptural injunctions that are there. So in this way, of course, just the order is changed a little bit, but then Prabhupada is explaining in this way, because here we are talking about the marriage of the mind with Vyavasayatmika Buddhi. Now, in conclusion, we all can relate this to many things. Like we have seen dramas of Me and My Mind. If you recall that drama there, very clearly it is explaining how mind is chanchala. But then it is controlled by associating with the Bhakti Lata. There, the Bhakti Lata that was depicted in those dramas or skits is about chanting, about Shravanam and Kirtanam, about chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. And then, what is the byproduct? Of course, the mind then becomes a friend, which means that it's a successful marriage. So the mind and the intelligence, and then there is no fall down that is happening. And so the person continues to progress, and then he'll continue in bhakti, and then finally he'll actually hear the sound of the flute of Krishna. So that is a prayojana that is there. So the Sambandha, Vidaya, and Prayojana is being described in a different way here. And then again, I was talking about 2.44, which is Bhogeshwaryasya Prasaktanam. In that also, Vyavasayatmika Buddhi is actually, it is Samadhauna Vidiyate. It does not happen if we are too much attached to the senses. So if the mind is too much leaning towards the senses and going by that, and then if it is bewildered by such things, see, it is natural for the mind to be attached. Like, say, I see something, I might like it, but that's not, but then if I get bewildered by it, and then I want to, always think about it, then it is not a right situation. We might like it, but then if we are not allowing the mind to get bewildered by such thing, we might see, if we are, say, we are bewildered by the riches or by beauty or any of these things, then it becomes a problem. But of course, it is natural for us to appreciate or become happy to see something which is beauty or beautiful, or which is opulent, and so on and so forth. But then we should ensure that it is not bewildered. We are not bewildered by that. If we are bewildered, then Krishna says, Vyavasayatmika Buddhi will not come in. And a person who is in the Vyavasayatmika Buddhi stage is Ekeha. He is always having one branch, that is always towards Krishna and nothing else. Otherwise, it is Bahushaka. That means it is many branched. And then the mind is so tricky that even, if you look at other verse in Bhagavad Gita, where Vishya Vinivartante Niraharasya Dehinam, where it says that taste remains, even if the objects, like, say, the object is not, or the senses are not seeing the object, but then in our memory it is there. And then we try to recall it from our memory, and then play it in our mind, and then try to derive some pleasure out of it. So this is another quality of the mind. This is also not a very good thing. And then how will this come out? This is only by Param Drishtva Nivartate. So by this will stop this action of recalling from the memory, playing it in the mind, and then trying to get some happiness or longing for it. That has to stop, and that can be stopped only by devotional service, by Param Drishtva Nivartante. So if we look at that particular shloka and then the purport, then we can understand how Prabhupada is bringing out those concepts very nicely there. So in one sense, we are discussing only one concept, which is about the mind and how it should be in Bhakti Yoga. But today we saw it in a slightly different way, where Narada Muni is eloquently describing it by way of marriage, Agastya Muni, and then the first daughter of Malayadvaja, who is having black eyes, which is related to Krishna, and so on and so forth. Krishna also is saying, understands the importance of mind, and then he's using, all of you can think what I'm going to say. He uses this particular word of Manmana Bhava Matbhakti twice in the whole Bhagavad Gita. It's the only thing which is being repeated. If somebody is repeating it, then definitely it means very important. Where it says in 9.34, it says Manmana Bhava Matbhakto Madhyaji Mam Namaskuru Mame Vaishyasi Yukaivam Atmanam Mat Parayanaha. So it says, engage the mind always in thinking of me. So thinking of me, we are told that we have to engage our mind in thinking of him. That we know. Conclusion we know. But then why that conclusion and what will happen if we don't have that conclusion is what we saw in the last 20-30 minutes, by way of if it doesn't happen, then how the mind tricks us and all that. And then we try to see the nature of mind, so that we'll come to terms and then see how it is a little more better controllable. Because oftentimes, even though we are told we leave it to Krishna and then wait for the mercy, but then we have to take the first step. The first step, or we have to make our effort. And making our effort, sometimes, these kind of things will help. It is not just our effort alone. Oh, now I'll read more about the mind and try to control it. That is not what we are trying to derive out of this entire discussion. It is about taking that first step, so that then the mind is blending to the intelligence. Thereby, then we surrender. Humility comes. So there are so many qualities that automatically manifest, which then pleases Krishna. And by mercy of Krishna, then our determination becomes stronger, and then our progress becomes more steady or faster, and so on and so forth. So at no point we should allow our mind to think that, oh, it's my effort, my understanding, which is taking me forward. Then the mind is tricking us again. So this is again more complicated it gets. So So we for that again, our acharyas are very clearly told, it is by the mercy of Hari, Guru, and then the Vaishnavas only that we are progressing and not because of our effort. Yes, our effort definitely is needed because that's the first step. But otherwise, much of the progress is because of the mercy that is flowing through. So this way, we can see how the mind is given so much of importance. In fact, even in Ambarish Maharaj, when Ambarish Maharaj is being described, it starts off by saying how he was, what was his temperament, where it starts off with the mana. It says, Sevaya mana Krishna pada ravindayor. So fixing the mind on the lotus feet of the Lord and then doing action. So that is the right way to do. Then hands are used for cleaning the temple. The legs are used to walk towards the temple, so on and so forth. So that all the five senses and the five other karmendriyas, all of that is aligned to actually serve the Lord. But it starts with the mind being fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord. So fixing the mind is important, and then subsequently, then all other things will come. And this is Vyavasaya. This is the wisdom of Bhakti cult or Bhakti Lata. All of these words can be used interchangeably because we know Bhakti Yoga and Buddhi Yoga are the same. I mean, that we have seen that in Bhagavad Gita, where Prabhupada very nicely brings out how these two are one and the same. And then we know that we need a month. We need to fix our mind. So fix our mind, what do we need? We need something to fix our mind. And that is why that something is called as mantra. So which prayate iti mantra. So which fixes the mind is called as mantra. So mercifully, we have been given this particular Maha Mantra. It's the very glorious mantra, which is the Hare Krishna mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this mantra is there for us to help us fix our mind and thereby ensure that the marriage between the mind and the intelligence is there, so that we have good offsprings, who is Achyuta, which means that we don't fall down, and thereby the son of Dridhavrita is Idmavaha, which means that is following of the scriptural injunctions. It means that it actually translates as somebody carrying wood for the sacrifice. So the act of carrying wood for sacrifice is actually explained as following the scriptural injunctions, because all these are given in the scriptures. So when you go for a sacrifice performed by your guru, then you will have to carry the wood, or you will have to accept a guru who is actually following the scriptural injunction. So whichever way you look at that last verse that we saw, it comes to the same thing, which is ensuring, which is having the firm belief that once intelligence is used properly, it isn't tied to the mind correctly, then we don't fall down, and then we follow all the injunctions. So that's the simple message that is being told here, but then it's a very important message, and it's a very complicating message, because that's how our mind works. So when we hear such flowery things, then definitely we are awed, and then we take to it more interestingly, and that's what Prachina Parishad did. So in conclusion, we'll see that. On that note, I'll stop here. It's 9:50. Sorry, 8:50. If there are any comments or questions anybody has, then please go ahead. Otherwise, I'll end my discussion here. Thank you so much. Danvas pranams to all of you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat pranam. Thank you very much for explaining the overview of the power of mind and nature of mind, and what is the futility of trying to control the mind artificially. And ultimately, you mentioned how marriage and the marriage should happen between mind and intelligence, so that that will help us in engaging the devotion service effectively. Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you for a very nice class. And the devotees may share the questions or comments or reflections.
Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. So,
Prabhuji, I have one question, Prabhu.
Yes,
So we
Prabhu.
know that this mind is Krishna also Arjuna also says Chanchalam hi mana Krishna, and several acharyas have actually composed songs on this power of mind, like
Yes,
Bhajahure Mane and other. So how do we know that we are really making progress in engaging the mind more and more on Krishna, Prabhuji?
good question,
Because
Prabhu. Because sorry, you were about to complete something. Go ahead.
no, I was just saying, the chanting, when we sit for chanting,
Yeah, yeah.
so our mind goes for a global trip, worldwide
Yes,
tour.
yes. Very true.
So, so I'm really struggling, and how to know,
Very true.
Prabhuji, we are really making advancement on.
Yeah, that's a very nice question. That's a question that every one of us can relate to, definitely. So all of us are in the same boat. More so, I am at the boat which is far, far behind. But then, if you look at what the acharyas have said, it says like, I mean, in fact, they say like every day beat your mind with the shoe, and then before you chant in the morning, and then beat it with the broom in the evening. So this beating has to happen because it is not controllable. It is not easy. So let's understand that fact. Number one. Number two, if you look at one way, there are certain things where if you look at the Gita, I mean, I just mentioned that Eke He Kuru Nandana. A person who is kind of, linking the wisdom or the intelligence to the mind, then the interest in other things will come down. This thing will not be AKH. It will be a single branch. It will not be many branches, his interest or his thought processes or his activities. So you'll see, we'll willingly keep shutting off the material association in many ways, or we'll keep to a minimum. So that's one way. And then it happens not because somebody said it. I mean, it is good to do it if somebody has said it. That is nice. But then if we do it on our own, then we realize that, okay, probably, I mean, that's what the Shastras say. It means that then we are actually, I mean, we can presume, or we can, I mean, though we should not conclude, but we can presume that there is mercy coming in, thereby some little progress is there. I'm not the same like I was before. So that's there. But then that's a very dangerous ground to be in. So the very fact that we want to measure our progress is not very, I mean, it's not a thing that, I mean, at least for me, I would try to avoid that particular flow of thought, because then mind will trick us into believing that we are progressing, and then trick us further into taking us downward. So thereby just going by, but then, yeah, just to answer your question, I'd say, and then this is what the acharyas have said. So our material attachments will keep coming down, and then our taste for doing devotional service will keep increasing. So that's a measure, an okay measure to understand where we are. I hope that answers your question. I don't know.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you. What I have noted, Prabhuji, when we are in a very critical situation, like either in work also,
Yeah.
like if I'm, if I take my work, if I'm in a very critical situation, troubleshooting an issue,
Yeah.
so that time, mind is fully focused, it doesn't get deviated here or there. But I don't see that level of attention when I'm, sitting in a, occasionally happens, but not, every time, right? When we are doing our chanting and so, yeah, occasionally, occasionally when we are in, distress, and that's the time I think sometimes we are able to engage the mind sincerely, more attentively, either in chanting or prayer. Thank you, Prabhu.
True. And also the shutting off the supply of food for the mind, which is shutting off the senses from the sense objects, that helps. Out of mind, I mean, out of sight is out of mind, right? So though the thing lingers, but then you keep on shutting off every time. How to shut off? We cannot shut it off and keep it blank. So there is a solution for that by the acharyas. They say, like even in physics, we know it's difficult to maintain vacuum, but then you maintain another pressure of some other gas, then it is easy. Like, so they fill it up with nitrogen, so to speak. So like that, this filling up of nitrogen is filling up of thoughts of Krishna and all that, so that other thoughts don't enter, or even if they enter, then it just fizzles out. It doesn't really bother much. So yeah, and that is the concentration that you're talking about. So when we are concentrating on something, and then we are always associating with that, then the other things fizzle out. Like even Prasannatma Maharaj, he says, no, feed the which dog wins? The dog that is fed, white or the black dog. I think all of us know that reference that we are talking about. So like this, whichever way you look at it, it is all coming down to that point of the action that is supposed to happen in our mind, on the battlefield of mind. So it all has to come together there. And then all these analogies, examples, talks will help us to fill our senses with these thoughts rather than other thoughts. And thereby, then we are able to keep the attachments at bay. I mean, we are not completely vanquishing it. We are keeping it at bay, like building a wall or a dam. You're keeping the water out, that's all. But there is a lot of pressure that is there on the other side. But then that wall is built there, so you're safe inside here. So that's how I would visualize it. Yes, Prabhu. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from devotees? There are few comments I see. Let me.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you for explaining nicely, Prabhu. But Sankarshan Prabhu asked a really very good question. That is what my problem is also. So thank you very much.
Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
We are all fighting with our minds in always. Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you, devotees. You have been very kind. Pranams. On this note, I think we can end here. Oh, sorry, you were saying you wanted to read, and I think there's a birthday also happening. So Ravi Lochan Prabhu's birthday here today, I think. So I'm just seeing the message here. So let's all wish Ravi Lochan Prabhu a very wonderful birthday, Krishna conscious birthday. So Prabhu, many happy returns of the day. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.